Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Adam Schiff, who will guide us through this informative session on creating corporate name authority. Many of you are likely familiar with Adam's outstanding training and mentoring skills. Adam Schiff is the principal cataloger at the University of Washington Library in Seattle. He holds an MLIS from the University of California, Berkeley, and a BA in Biological Sciences from Cornell University. In addition to his cataloging expertise, Adam is deeply involved in the cataloging community. He serves as a NACO, SACO, and BIPCO coordinator and contributes to numerous committees and task groups, including the North American RDA Committee, NARDAC. He also has been an instrumental member of the PCC Standing Committee on Standard Task Group on Evaluation Guidelines for Non-Latin Script References in Name Authority Record. Creating corporate name authority can be challenging for many catalogers, particularly due to the inconsistency of corporate naming conventions. Today, Adam will walk us through NACO rules and practices for corporate body name authority, focusing on challenges and strategies for working with non-Latin scripts, especially Arabic and Persian. He will also cover current guidelines for creating and using name authority records for family names, particularly as subject. And without further delay, Adam, please take it away.
Thank you, Iman. It's my pleasure to be here. I guess we should, let's see can I share my screen? Okay, yeah, now I can.
I think you can.
Okay. And is that looking okay?
It looks great.
Okay, great. So it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Iman, for inviting me, particularly since you know that I have a very limited, including basically almost zero knowledge of Arabic and Persian languages. Although I must admit, I do work with catalogers who do have that language expertise, and I review their authority work. So I've learned a few things along the way. What we're going to talk about today is going to be selective. It's a review or overview of some NACO best practices for corporate body name authorities and families. In the 90 minutes we have been allotted, we don't have time to do a comprehensive look at everything. Almost all of you have probably attended NACO training, and there's a full day on corporate bodies in that module of training slides that go for a whole week. We are going to continue at the moment to follow original RDA. I'm going to assume that all of you or nearly all of you are already NACO trained. We can't cover everything, and of course you still have to consult all of the appropriate documentation for RDA, policy statements, the DCM Z1, the NACO training course is a really useful reference, the NACO participants manual, etc. So I'm going to focus on some common issues and mistakes that I've noticed, that Iman has noticed, particularly in access points. We won't have time to go into things like attributes of corporate bodies. And as much as possible, I've chosen examples in Arabic and/or Persian or other Arabic script languages. So we'll start with corporate bodies. Of course, some of this is going to be review. We're talking about RDA Chapter 11, and a corporate body is only considered to be a corporate body in RDA if it is identified by a particular name and if it acts or may act as a unit. In other words, corporate bodies have people behind them that are running them, staffing them. They can act in some way. And a particular name means that it consists of words that are a specific appellation rather than a general description. And we'll look at an example of that with relationship to a conference in an upcoming slide. What we're trying to do first, of course, is to determine the preferred name for the body. And that generally is the name by which the body is commonly identified. RDA tells us to determine the preferred name from the following sources in a particular order of preference. And the preferred source is sources of information in manifestations associated with the corporate body. And if you go to that list of preferred sources for a book, the preferred source would be the title page over other sources within a monograph. If there are no sources of information that are in that list, then RDA says you can use other formal statements appearing in manifestations associated with the corporate body. And then the third preferred source is other sources, which would be things from outside the resource that you're cataloging, including reference sources. Now, it's common that it's very common that you only have one name that's in the book, and so it's very simple to determine the preferred name. But there are times where you have to deal with different forms of a body's name, and RDA includes instructions for different spellings, different language forms for the same body, international bodies, and conventional names. And we'll look at some of those instructions. So in terms of determining the preferred name for the body, RDA also has some important instructions on what to do with names that have initials or names with initial articles, what to do about terms of incorporation and certain other terms, and names in a non-preferred script. And that is particularly applicable to this webinar because the preferred script for NACO is the Latin script, and MELA catalogers are often dealing with names in some other script. And then finally, we'll look at a subordinate and related bodies, which is, I think, an area where there's a lot of confusion. Now, for different forms of a body, RDA says to choose the name that appears in the preferred sources of information over names that appear elsewhere. It cautions us not to treat changes of names as variant names, and then it refers us to another section of Chapter 11 for name changes. It tells us that if different forms of the name appear in the preferred source of information, to choose the form that is presented formally. It doesn't tell us what formally means. So that's a cataloger judgment. You have to sort of decide which of these is that, or if any, is presented formally. If no form is presented formally, and I generally would interpret formally to be like in the title itself, at the head of the title in some kind of bold, but not just something that's inconsequential perhaps. So, but if no form is presented formally, or if all of the forms are presented formally, then we go back to the basic default that you choose the most commonly found form of name on that source. Now, if you only have two forms of name, there is no commonly found form of name. It's 50-50. So RDA says that if that's the case, choose a brief form of the name if there is one, like an acronym or an initialism, as long as that brief form is sufficiently specific to differentiate the body from others with the same or similar brief names. And also, if there is no brief form that is specific enough to differentiate two or more bodies with the same or similar names, then it tells us to prefer a form found in reference sources over the official form. So let's look at a few examples of how this all plays out. I'm sure you all memorized all those bullet points. Here we've got actually a sound recording, and on the label it says AMAR, and on the container it has both the acronym and a fuller form. Because RDA says to take the preferred name off of a preferred source for a sound recording, the disk label is the preferred source of information over the container. And therefore, the preferred name for this body is AMAR, not the fuller form. Now, we have to make a judgment as to whether AMAR can stand on its own, and generally, most acronyms are not considered good enough to convey the idea of a corporate body, so a qualifier has been added to the authorized access point to explain what AMAR is. And we have, we'll see in an upcoming slide, you have a choice of adding a type of corporate body, or maybe the spelled out form, or a place, or something else. Now here we have in a case where we have a newsletter, and on the title page, it has both National Arab American Medical Association and an acronym AAMA. So we can't really tell from looking at this authority record what this newsletter looked like. I didn't find an example, a screenshot that I could show you. So, but we have to assume that the cataloger knew the rules. And this was done originally, you can see from 1993, it was probably set up in 1995 under AACR2, but the rules haven't really changed from AACR2 to RDA in this respect. And so we can judge that either fuller form, either the fuller form is presented formally on the newsletter, or it was chosen as the preferred name because AAMA was not sufficiently specific to differentiate this body from other bodies with the same acronym or similar acronym. And it is the case that other bodies do have the acronym AAMA. So it would be appropriate in this case to choose the fuller form, National Arab American Medical Association. For spelling, we are told that if variant spellings of the name appear in manifestations associated with the body, choose the form found in the manifestation first received. And then there's a policy statement that says, if a name was established based on an old orthography and orthographic reform has occurred, change the authorized access point to reflect the reformed orthography. That is, consider the preferred name to have changed. And here's an example showing how that might play out using English. We have in 1984 a book in French, and on the title page it says Arab Center for Energy Studies. And a year later, there's a book in English which has the same name, but the word center is spelled differently. Now, if we were cataloging this based on the first, if all we had was the 1984 book, we're going to set this up with the spelling, the American spelling of center. But now another book comes in with a different spelling, and we have to consider, has the preferred name changed? Do we need to reevaluate what the preferred name is? And in this case, the rule says that choose the form in the first manifestation received. So the cataloger would simply add a variant for the spelling CENTRE as a variant access point in this case. What about languages? RDA says to choose as the preferred name the form in the official language of the body. So for a government agency in Qatar, the official language is Arabic. So we will choose the Arabic form of name in the Romanized form, of course, over the English form, Ministry of Finance. If there is more than one official language and one of these is English, RDA says choose the English form, and that's because the language of cataloging for NACO is English. So here we have a Saudi oil company, but apparently it has two official languages, one of which is English. So instead of Aramco Al Saudia, and you'll have to apologize for any mangling of language that I say, we'll choose the Saudi Aramco name over the Arabic form of the name. I know it is sometimes difficult to determine if there is an official language and what that is. So that there's obviously some judgment involved, but in many times you can find out from a website now, or you can even email and say, do you have multiple official languages? But I guess in this example, it was known that English was one of the official languages of Saudi Aramco. If the body has more than one official language and none are English, RDA, and this is definitely applicable in certain Arab countries where you might have French as well as English, French and Arabic, sorry. Choose as the preferred name the form of name in the language used predominantly in resources associated with the body. So this is an example, is a Moroccan university. It teaches mostly in French, actually. So it's at Université Sultan Moulay Slimane. But the Arabic name is actually predominantly found in the resources that are available in OCLC that catalogers have cataloged. So because it has two official languages, English and Arabic, I'm sorry, French and Arabic, we will choose the preferred name based on predominant usage in resources. And then RDA goes on to say, in case of doubt, choose the form that is presented first in the first manifestation received. Okay, international bodies. RDA tells us that if the name of an international body appears in English on resources associated with it, choose that form as the preferred name. There's a lot of confusion about what is an international body, and this is kind of my operational definition. An international body operates beyond the national boundary of their headquarters. So it's not just limited to the country in which they have a headquarters, and its scope of activity is beyond one single country. So here's an example of an Arab international body, the Arab States Broadcasting Union. It is headquartered in Tunis, but there is an English name that appears on some resources associated with it. Other names appear in Arabic and French, but because it does use English on some of its resources, the English name is chosen because it is an international body, even if English is not one of its official languages. Conferences, international conferences are a great example of what are typically considered to be international bodies as well. So the International Population Conference happens every 4 years. It has a scope that's international. People come to it from all over the world, and it moves from country to country. And there are other names sometimes associated with it, but there is an English name, and so that is chosen as the preferred name used in the authorized access point. Now, once you've determined the preferred name for an ongoing series of conferences, you're going to continue to use that unless there's a name change in access points for individual instances of that particular conference. So here we have an example for the 26th conference that was held in Marrakesh, Morocco. And in this case, we do have an Arabic form of its name as well as French. We know that in Morocco, French and Arabic, well, I think Arabic is the official language, but French also has a pretty high status. But because the English name was chosen for the preferred ongoing series of conferences, we need to use that English name in the individual access points if we're setting them up. And we can make variants, as you see here, from the French form and from the Arabic form. And just one more example. Here's a conference held every 3 years in Cairo. And you can see from the first 670 that there are publications only in Arabic, that were probably only in Arabic. And there are also, from the same year, for the third conference, a publication in English. And so because we have a name that indicates it's international, Mu'tamar al-Dawli, or International Conference, we will assume that its scope is international. If it calls itself international, let's not question it. Let's take the easy way out and assume they know what they're doing. Because the English name does appear on some resources, even though this is always held in Cairo, we choose the English form of this name as the preferred name. Okay, for names with initials, RDA has some instructions about initials, and the treatment of initials is different between personal names and corporate names. So for corporate names, we do not leave a space after initials that have periods of what RDA calls full stops. And RDA also says if you find acronyms or initials that don't have periods between them, then record them without spaces. And here's a good example of an organization that uses both. So in its preferred name, it uses I period P period U period. It has another acronym in French with U period I period P period A period. but in its English acronym doesn't use periods, and so we don't add periods if it doesn't use periods. You are allowed to take something that has periods in them and make a variant access point from without if you think that users would search under that. Now, for initial articles, RDA has two sets of rules, one of which is an alternative rule, which says to omit an initial article unless the name is to be accessed under the article. And we have a policy statement that says to apply the alternative. This is where I think I see a lot of people, particularly those who don't know Arabic, input things incorrectly into the authority file. So this body in Arabic is al-majlis, al meaning the, and most, as I learned, it seems like most Arabic names do start with the initial al, and we would have to drop that from the preferred name that's used in the 410. It would not be incorrect to make another 410 from this name beginning with al, if you think that would be useful, that users might start searching or browsing under al. But I'm not seeing a lot of people doing that, but it wouldn't be incorrect. Terms of incorporation and certain other terms has its own rule, and we are supposed to omit terms of incorporation unless they are an integral part of the name or are needed to make clear that what the name is a corporate body. And some examples of those terms include things like incorporated or inc, E period, V period, which is a German abbreviation, limited spelled out, or LTD, etc. We also omit terms indicating state ownership of a corporate body and a word or phrase abbreviated or in full indicating the type of incorporated entity. So here are two examples. We have the Idhat Mauritania, which is in French Radio Mauritanie. So it's the Radio Mauritania. The name includes terms of incorporation at the end. You can see in the Arabic form, in the 410, it has sh-m, and in the French form, it has s-a, both of which indicate some kind of term of incorporation. And so those, in the case of Idhat Mauritania, dropping that off still conveys the idea of a corporate body. It means Radio Mauritania, and that is pretty well understood to mean a corporate body. So the authorized access point is set up without the abbreviation. On the second example, we have the Sharikat al-Sam al-Arabi, and you can see that the name actually includes al-Mahduda, which means limited. And so Sharikat means company, so the name already includes the idea that this is a corporate body. So we drop the al-Mahduda from the end because it is not needed to convey the idea of a corporate body, but you can still make a 410 variant access point from that form, and you can also make the Arabic script variant access point. Now, this is when I ran across in OCLT, where I'm finding that catalogers seem to be keeping that term of Mahduda in access points. So you can see I just did a browse. I think I did a keyword search for al-Mahduda in the OCLC authority file, and you can see number 6 and number 9 and number 10 and number 11, 12, and 13 all start with Sharikat, which means company. So the last word should have been dropped from this because it is RDA says to drop terms of incorporation unless they are needed to convey the idea of a corporate body. For names found in a non-preferred script, which is of particular importance to us for this webinar, RDA tells us to transliterate the name according to ALA LC romanization tables, and NACO policy is that non-Latin forms that appear on a source can be recorded as variant access points in 411, 4XX fields, 410 or 411 for corporate bodies. And you are all, I'm sure, very well familiar with the policy that's been years-long standing policy where in the 670 field, you record the non-Latin script form that is found, followed by an equal sign, and then followed by the ALA LC romanization. So that, including that Arabic, in this case, Persian script variant name in the 670 provides the justification for the 410 in the authority field. So here's just another example. Here's the University of Jordan, Jamia al-Urduniya. And so it is known in a variety of non-preferred scripts. So you can see we have Arabic, Persian, Hebrew, and both, I think, Russian and Ukrainian in Cyrillic forms of this body's name. Now, subordinate and related bodies, which is, I think, where people get there's a lot of confusion. People have trouble with that. We're told to record the name of a subordinate or body or related body directly, under its own name, unless it belongs to one or more of the types that are listed at 11.2.2.14. And just a reminder, this applies to both truly subordinate bodies, but it also applies to related bodies. So that's the rule, says subordinate or related bodies. Related bodies might necessarily not be controlled by the higher body. Good examples of those are an alumni association, which usually isn't controlled by the university, or Friends of the Library group, which isn't usually controlled by the library, but it's related to the library. So here's an example of a name that is entered directly under its own name, the Markaz al-Nashr al-Lubnani, and that is because this name does not belong to any of the types listed in 11.2.2.14, which we will now look at. It's a center, I believe, and center is not a, Markaz, I believe, means center, and that's not a word that typically would cause something to be subordinate unless it's a university. So type 1, category 1, is a name implying containing a term that implies it is one part of another bigger organization. Some examples in English are department, division, section, and branch, and I've also given you some Arabic and Persian examples of words, certainly not a comprehensive list. But you can see some examples here. In the first example, we have a department within a university, Department of Philosophy of a particular university. In the second case, we have a government agency, a department within the government of Iran. And in the last case, we have a section of a corporate body, some other corporate body in Yemen. But a reminder, all parent bodies, including immediate superior bodies, must also be established. So you need to establish the higher body first, if it isn't already, before establishing the subordinate. So for example, in my first example, if that university is not already established, you should establish that first before creating the NAR for the Department of Philosophy. Now, here's a common example where you have a mixture of languages. And I know Iman asked me particularly to address this. So this is a case where many times you get a resource that's not in the language, the official language of the body. You can see from the 670 in this record that it's a book in English, and the name found on it is English, the Fateh University Department of Botany. So the university has already been established in Arabic, because I think this is in Libya, yeah. So, but all we have in English for the subordinate body is an English name, Department of Botany. If that is the only name available, you have to create, just since department is a subordinate word, we enter that subordinately and we end up with a mixture of Arabic and English. And this is where we code an authority provisional. So you can see up in the auth status in the fixed field, it's coded with a C, and it's a good idea. Not every record has it, but it's a very helpful idea to have a 667 note that explains why this has been coded provisional. And it's because at the time this was established in 1985 under AACR2, this Arabic name wasn't available. We didn't have the internet back then. It wasn't easy to go and see if we could find the Arabic name for this department. Now it would be a lot easier. But this record has been upgraded a number of times and has been upgraded to RDA, and nobody has tried to figure out the Arabic name, or if we, perhaps it doesn't even exist anymore. So we might not be able to figure it out. What you do not do is simply translate the words Department of Botany into Arabic and make that a name, because it has to be based on usage. Type 2 is a name containing a term that normally implies administrative subordination. RDA gives us words like committee or commission. I've given you a couple of Arabic script examples. But there's a clause in the rule here that says you only apply this if the name of the higher body is required for the identification of the subordinate body. There is a policy statement for this type that has a list of other terms in English, French, and Spanish that are considered to normally imply administrative subordination. So English terms include words like administration, agency, authority, bureau, task force, etc. I did have a look at the MELA Arabic NACO manual and the Persian NACO manual, and there's nothing actually much in there at all about corporate names. So MELA might want to consider creating its own list of these words for Arabic and Persian, if that would be helpful to catalogers to applying this particular type. So here's an example. We have Al-Lajna Al-Wataniya Lil Sukan. That's the name. It's part of the government of Algeria. The rule says, does it contain a name that normally implies administrative subordination? And in this case, yes, it does, Lajna. But is the name of the higher body required? And the answer is yes. There's nothing in the name of this body that indicates it's Algerian. So for an example like this, we enter this subordinately because it passes the type 2 test, as well as the clause that says you only apply it in a certain circumstance. Here's a similar example. Again, we have in English, the Higher Commission for Scientific Research. It has one of those words, commission or committee. And again, there's nothing indicating that this is part of Syria, the government of Syria. So this, we apply this type and it does get entered subordinately. But look at this example. So here we have the Wakala al-Mauritania lil Anba, and the key point is it does contain a word indicating administrative subordination. We can see that the French name is agence and the English name is agency, which is one of those words listed in the English and French lists in the policy statement. So it does fit this type, but then is the name of the higher body required for identification of the subordinate body? In this case, Mauritania is included in the body's name. So we don't need to add the subordinately to Mauritania. So this name gets entered, it fails this type 2 test, and it gets entered directly under its own name. And here, one more example where, again, we have the muassasat, which could mean department, but in this case, based on the English names it uses, it means authority or agency. But Saudi Arabia is already part of its name, and so this gets entered directly under its own name rather than subordinately through Saudi Arabia. Type 3 is the category of names that are very general in nature. In other words, they contain neither distinctive proper nouns or adjectives or subject words, or that they simply indicate a geographic, chronological, or numbered or lettered subdivision of a parent body. The examples in RDA include words like Research Institute, Documentation Center, Friends of the Library, or things like Central Region, Class of 1957, or district assembly number 3. So here's an example in Arabic where we have a library, right? Maktaba. So you can see from the 670, we're considering this name does not appear as a phrase. It appears as University of Jordan, comma, library. So that is not a phrase. So the name that we're looking at to consider this rule, whether it's applicable, is just al-maktaba. We drop the initial article, and now the word is maktaba, which is library, which is very general in nature. So this gets entered subordinately to the university. In the second publication, you can see that the name also appears as Maktabat al-Jamia, in other words, university libraries. Again, that would be considered to be very general in nature. Here we've got another example where, again, the name the name is not one long phrase. It's a series of parts of the hierarchy. So we've got the Republic of Sudan, then the ministry, and then the department, and then the Markaz al-Tawtiq, which is the documentation center. Luckily, I was able to find this example because documentation center is one of the examples in RDA. So that is considered to be general in nature, so it would be entered subordinately. In this case, different departments within the government of Sudan could have departments of documentation centers, so we interpose the intermediate parent body into this heading. Another example would be a word like mutamar, which means conference. So in this case, it's the first example. The first 670 is the first conference associated with this particular body, and then the second 670 we have the second conference, and so mutamar is general in nature, and so we would set this up subordinately to the organization that is holding the conference. And here's an example of a geographic region. I could not find a good one in Arabic or Persian, but here we have the Near East and Africa region unit of the Medical Women's International Association. So because the words on that name are just Near East and Africa region, it's general, it's considered type 3. It's simply a geographic subdivision. Type 4 is a name that doesn't convey the idea of a corporate body and does not contain the name of a higher body. So there's two clauses. It have to fit both to fall under this. So examples that they give in RDA are words like human resources, economics and research and analysis. So very general words that don't convey by themselves the idea of a corporate body. And here's an Arabic example where we have al-shu'un al-thaqafiyya, which translates to cultural affairs. So the name cultural affairs by itself does not convey the idea of a corporate body. So this is a kind of unit that has to be entered subordinately to its parent. Another example, in this case, we have Persian, or this may be Dari, I'm not sure. But the subordinate body's name is Pushtun Zag, which means Pashto voice. So this is a particular unit of radio Kabul and just called Pashto voice. Now the Pashto voice does not convey the idea of a corporate body, so it needs to be entered subordinately to radio Kabul. But here are some examples where that do convey the idea of a corporate body and do contain the name of the higher body, so they fail this test and they get entered directly under their own name. So a body called BC Fisheries, which is a government body of the British Columbia. The name contains BC, which is the government, and so even though fisheries by itself doesn't convey the idea of a corporate body, BC Fisheries is considered to do that. A similar example, California Records and Information Management. By itself, it doesn't sound particularly corporate, but because it's a part of the government of California and it contains the name of the higher body, it is entered and established in direct order. So here's another example. Here's a Persian example for the National Iranian Radio and Television. So by itself, that name Radio Televizioni Milli Iran may or may not convey the idea of a corporate body, but it contains the name Iran in it. And so it fails this test and it gets entered directly. Type 5 deals with university, faculty, school, colleges, institutes, laboratories, etc. that simply indicate a particular field of study, and that's the important part of this. So if it includes more than just a particular field of study in its name, then it does not get entered subordinately. So for example, here we have a university in Iran, and it's the Faculty of Sports Sciences. So that just has a word that indicates a type of unit, faculty, and then a subject, sports sciences. So that gets entered subordinately. But here's another Iranian body that is a subordinate body. It's part of a university, but it's the Danishkadai Pizishki Isfahan, or the Isfahan Medical School. And it is part of a university. But because the name of this school includes the word Isfahan, which is the location in this case, it fails this test. Isfahan is not a subject and not part of the field of study. There's no Isfahan medicine, right? That's not a subject. So this gets entered directly under its own name in a 110. And here's another example using Kulliyat, which is on faculty. So the Kulliyat al-Sharia, that is simply a field of study, but here's a university faculty called the Kulliyat Tib Asyut. And Asyut is a place. And so if that's because the place is in the name, it no longer is simply a field of study. And so we enter it directly under its own name. And one more example with an example of failing this test. So here we have a university the Center for Strategic Studies at the University of Jordan. So that is simply a field of study. It's got a word like center, school, college, etc., with only a field of study. So that gets entered subordinately to the University of Jordan. But in the bottom example, we've got another center, but this center includes somebody's name. In English, it's Mohammed bin Hamad Center for Muslim Contribution to Civilization. Because this has that person's name in it, it fails this category because it's not simply a particular field of study. So this center gets entered directly under its own name, and with a 410 for it as a subordinate of the university. And just another example, two other examples of institute, in this case, where we have the name of the institute, and it's just the subject area words, so it gets subordinately entered, or a study, some particular type of program, in this case, University of Cairo's Afro-Egyptian Studies program. Again, the key thing here in the 670s is that the name of the subordinate body is separated by commas from the parent. So we have to just consider those words of the subordinate body, not the whole phrase. It's not a phrase that we're looking at. Here's another example of where we end up having to code something provisional. So we have the Iraqi Journal for Electrical and Electronic Engineering, and on the title page it says University of Basra College of Engineering, and there's nothing in Arabic. If you look up University of Basra, the authorized form is Jamiat al-Basra, but if all we can have available is the English form of the college, we'll end up setting it up subordinately in a mixed language access point, coding this provisional. And the second example, it shows that it's not just English that this happens to. In Tunisia and Morocco, it's pretty common that you might end up with a mixture of Arabic and French. Type 6 deals with names of non-governmental bodies with a name that includes the entire name of the higher or related body. So the key things in type 6 is it's got to be a non-governmental body, and it has to include the entire name of the higher body. So this is where we're looking at a phrase where there's no commas separating out the parts. So RDA tells us to distinguish cases in which the subordinate body's name includes the names of higher bodies from cases in which the names of the higher bodies appear only in association. So a good example of only in association would be the name of the higher body is at the top of the page and the name of the subordinate body is at the bottom of the page. That would be where it's split out in two places. If you were recording that in a 670, you would put that in probably using a semicolon to show that here we have one name that appeared on this source, and here's another name, but they don't appear in conjunction. They're not in a phrase. The policy statement says that the word includes in the rule applies to any linguistic relationship between the name of the body and its parent, or which can be a higher or related body. And that the phrase entire name is the preferred name of the higher or related body, not necessarily the authorized access point for that body. So if we add a qualifier to a corporate body for its authorized access point, we don't consider that qualifier to be part of if we're judging this category, because that's a catalog addition. It's not part of the name. We'll look at some examples. So when the name of a subordinate body contains more than one unit in the hierarchy, we apply the entire name provision in this instruction only to the body immediately above the body being established. And then there is an exception for Japanese, Korean, and Chinese that I don't talk about here. We will also treat as falling under this type if the subordinate body's name contains the entire name of its parent body, except that the form of the parent body in the subordinate body's name is in another language. So this would cover the case where you have a phrase that is in English, even though the parent body might be established in Arabic. And also important in the other category here is if a named meeting contains the entire name of a corporate body as defined above, treat the meeting subordinately to the authorized access point for the body if the name contains, in addition to the name of the body, no more than a generic term for the meeting, or no more than a generic term plus a venue of the meeting, number, date, or other sequencing element. So that's really important for conference names. In other words, if you have the University of Jordan conference on something or other, as long as that has other subject words and conference on biology, that would not fit this category of being a generic term, because conference, if it just said conference, yeah, that's generic. Conference on biology, that's specific. I want to go back just briefly to the previous slide. RDA does not tell us what a non-governmental body is. And we do not have a policy statement that tells us what a non-government body is either. But we did under AACR 2, we had an LCRI under Rule 24.17, which gave us some guidance about what types of bodies to consider governmental versus non-governmental. And under that rule interpretation, a body is treated as a non-governmental body if its immediate parent body is entered under a heading that is not the name of a government. Now, I think people are still applying that LCRI because there's nothing in RDA or even a policy statement to tell us which of these is governmental versus non-governmental. So this is a judgment call. You'll have to make your judgment. But universities are typically not considered to be governmental bodies, as an example. Okay, so let's look at an example here. Here we have a company, the Sharikat, but you can see in the 670, what we have is one long phrase. So we have the Idrat al-Alakat al-Ma wa al-Tadrib. Sharikat, and B means at or of, right? Of the company. So this name includes the entire name of the parent as well as the subordinate in its name. And so this is it fits this category. It's a company. And so it would be entered subordinately because of the usage. Totally depends on the usage that you have in the resource that you're cataloging. So there is no, we'll get different results based on different things that we get. So if we had gotten a different publication that instead of having B Sharikat had a comma between Tadrib and Sharikat, we would be treating this in a different way, right? It might still fall because Idarat, I believe, also means department, if I'm remembering correctly. It might fit a different category and still get entered subordinately, but it would fail this particular type. And here's another example at the bottom of the screen. This lajnat also has the word bikuliat, meaning at the faculty of this university. And the faculty is entered directly because it includes al-Daman, which is a place. So it's not entered subordinately to a university. But in this case, the lajnat is entered subordinately to the kuliyat because of the way the name appears in the book as a phrase. Now, in this case, we have an example where we entered subordinately because it's a conference, in this case, Mutamar al-Sanawi, meaning annual conference, and that is generic. The 670 says it is the third annual conference of this particular organization, the Egyptian Heritage Preservation Society. So although the 670, it does show that it includes the full name of the parent, in this case, it's a conference and it has very generic words, Mutamar al-Sanawi. So this gets entered subordinately. You can see there is a 411 made from this phrase, dropping off the number, the third al-Tani, from the name, but we can make a variant access point in direct order. And here's one more example, which I wanted to call attention to because there is a very common error that I'm noticing that catalogers make, not just in Arabic and Persian examples. So here we have, you can see in the 670, this is in English. It's a sound recording. It's the National Iranian Radio and Television Chamber Orchestra. So that name, the preferred source is the label. So that name includes the full name in English of the National Iranian Radio and Television, right? Which we already looked at. So even though it's in English, we can set this up subordinately. It would be the chamber orchestra would be entered subordinately to the heading for the radio and television. Luckily on the container, they did give us the Persian form of this name. And again, it also appears as a phrase. And so we can set this up subordinately in the 110. But notice what I've done. There was a 410 in this record for National Iranian Radio and Television, period, subfield B, Chamber Orchestra. This is not valid because National Iranian and Radio Television is a variant name for the Persian name of this body. And when you're making subordinate entries, the higher levels within the subordinate access point must be the authorized form, not a variant access point for the higher body. So that correct reference is the one right below it, where we have a mixture of Persian and English chamber orchestra. Now, there is an exception to this that we've been doing for years for non-Latin script variants, and that's because we've been coding them with that says that these non-Latin script variants have not been evaluated. As it turns out, when and if PCC approves the recommendations of the non-Latin script access point task force, you will be able to continue to do what we're seeing in non-Latin script, where you can make a variant access point where all parts of the access point are in a non-Latin script. But if you're using Roman, that isn't the case. So here are a couple of examples. Here we have the Maktabat of the University of Algiers, the library. So library again, even though the full phrase is Maktabat Jamiat Aljazeera, that is a case where the parent is in the name, and so it fits this case, and we enter it subordinately. It might also fit the case that we looked at for type 5 for a university in this case, where it's just the name of a field, school, etc., library. I'm not sure if library fits into that, but it also fits the case where we have a generic word like library. But that would be the case if it was Maktabat, comma, Jamiat Al-Jazeera. In this case, it's a phrase, so it fits this type. In the second case, this is illustrating the case that we're looking at the full preferred name of the higher or related body, not the authorized access point. So you can see in the 670, the name that appears on the source is Maktaba al-Wataniya bi Markaz Isa al-Takafi. And so the parent is the Markaz Isa al-Takafi, but the authorized access point for that includes the qualifier Bahrain. We ignore that qualifier when considering whether it fits this type. So it does pass the test of type 6, and the Maktaba gets entered subordinately. Type 7, there's a lot of types. I'm only going to cover the most important ones that are commonly encountered. But type 7 is a ministry or similar major executive agency. In other words, one that has no other agency above it. Ministry, for example, here we have the Ministry of Social Development in Oman. So again, the name itself is just Wizarat al-Tanmiya al-Ijtimaiya. Pardon my mangling. So it doesn't say Oman in it. But even if it did, because it's a type 7 ministry, we would enter it subordinately to the government. And another example from Persian, where we have the Iranian Ministry of Interior, again, would be entered subordinately. Type 8 is a government official or a religious official. There are additional government official instructions at 11.22.18, but I wanted to mention that for government officials, record the title of the official in the form of a subdivision of the authorized access point representing the jurisdiction, and we record the title in English. And this is a change from AACR 2. For certain types of government officials, we use the official language of the government, but now we use English both for heads of government as well as heads of state. And so we would always use English unless there's no equivalent term in English. And for individual holders of an office, we are instructed to code the record as not valid for use as a subject and to give a subject usage note in a 667 field. And those instructions are found in the DCM Z1 008 and 00815 and 00811 and the 667, as well as in the subject headings manual H432. So an example of this. So the Prime Minister of Egypt. Arabic is the official language of Egypt, so you might expect that we would use the Arabic name, but for government officials, we use English. So we've got Egypt, something to be Prime Minister, and then a variant from the Arabic form. For an individual incumbent, you can see this example of an authority. We have Iran, and then president, and then in the case of individuals, we have the date of their had that office, and then space, colon space, and a surname for the individual. But you can see up in this fixed fields, because this is an individual incumbent, subject and subject use are coded N and B. Those are the 0811 and 0815. And then there's also the 667 note that should be added that says you cannot use this government body, this a government office as a subject. Instead, you would use, if you need a subject, you use the person's name who held the office. Okay, for conferences. The preferred name instructions are in a couple places in RDA. One of the key things is that, and I'm using color highlighting and color text to show in the examples. We are omitting indications of number and years of a conference from the name, but unlike AACR2, we are retaining frequency words in the name. So in the example on the resource, it says it has al-talit, which means the third. So when we determine the preferred name, we drop that from the name. So we end up with the preferred name dropping al-talit. Here's another example showing both omitting and retaining. So we omit numbers and years, but retain frequency words. So in this case, on the title page, it is it's the third annual veterinary congress in Arabic. So al-Thanawi means annual. We retain that word, but we drop al-Talit, which means third. So the preferred name will include al-Thanawi. And in English, we would include the word annual as well as a variant. Okay, so for conferences, this is one area where I think there's a lot of errors or things that aren't seem to be justified in authority records. Conferences must have a specific appellation, just like all other corporate bodies, rather than a general description. So we're looking in English, for example, we're looking for something like proceedings of the Conference on Iranian Languages where the conference words are capitalized, rather than this is the proceedings of a conference on Iranian languages where the word conference is lowercase. So it has to be a specific name that you can determine. For English, of course, that's really helpful. We can usually rely on capitalization. With Arabic, you don't really have that. You can't rely on that. But you have to determine, does it have a specific appellation? Common errors that I am noticing is that the cataloger who created the authority record seems to be making up a name out of thin air that I don't see any justification for. You look at an authority record, and what's in the 110 or the 111 does not actually match anything that they've recorded in the 670. It seems sometimes catalogers seem to make things up. I'm also seeing a lot of cases where capitalization is not correctly given in access points or in 670s. For example, in English, the numbers like first, second, third are considered part of the name. We drop them, but they're part of the name, and so they should be capitalized. And the same when you're transliterating Arabic or Persian, I believe you do capitalize proper names. So you should capitalize, as we saw here, al-Talit, where the T is capitalized. Okay. And then I'm also seeing very often, and I understand this is sometimes a problem because of the right to left issues in inputting, but that qualifiers included in authorized access point are often omitted in variant access points. This is particularly problematic for conferences because if it's an individual conference and you don't include those number, date, and place in the variant, then that is basically a different entity. It's the ongoing series of conference, not the individual conference. So let's look at some examples of some issues that have come up as I've looked at various Arabic conference names. And I'm sure I could do the same kind of analysis with English names because they're also often confusing. But here we've got a conference, Mutamar al-Dawah li Hawar al-Adyan, or in English, the Doha Interfaith Conference. So now, if we look at this Arabic name in the 111 and we look at the 670 that was recorded, the name doesn't match. So for one thing, in the 670, it says al-Duwali, which I believe means international. Or it could, or depending on the spelling, it could mean national, right? So I don't understand why it was dropped from the 111. Or that's not a frequency word. It's not a number word. So it's unclear why the cataloger dropped it. In the first 411, the capitalization in English is incorrect. Now, if you look at the 670, they've recorded this with lowercase I and C. Maybe that is the way it actually appears on the book, but we capitalize proper nouns and proper names. So even if it appears in lowercase in the book, the words interface and conference should be capitalized because it's a proper name. Otherwise, it's a generic, it's not a specific appellation. It's a more generic description. There's some capitalization issues with the Arabic as well, where the words talit and ashar and hiwar and adyan also ought to be capitalized. And then, as I mentioned, Doha Interfaith Conference without capitalization, it doesn't mean that it is a specific appellation. So, and in English, we capitalize those words, those letters. There's another example, and questions that you all could probably answer that I don't have the answer for. And I think Iman answered my question for this. But so you can see in the 411s, we have Duali versus Dolly. And I wasn't clear based on what was given in the 670. All I saw was Duali. So I thought, is the cataloger, is this just an alternative spelling that the cataloger is making? But but I think Iman explained that this is open to interpretation, depending on whether the vowels are present in the Arabic script. So the cataloger has judged that it's probably Duali versus Doli, but they've made another access point. There is the second 411 is in Arabic script. The first 411 in Arabic script is in Persian. The second one is in Arabic script, and there's no justification for it. There's no 670 for it. And I mean, this record may have been in older records. We know that there was a population, automated population of non-Latin script references, and so they might not correspond. But this is a record created with RDA. The book is from 2014. The conference is held in 2015, long after we had implemented RDA. So there should be Arabic script romanization given in the second 670 to justify that Arabic script. Both of the Arabic script variant references do not include qualifiers, which makes them variants for the ongoing series of conferences. I understand why they might have been left off, but you would find these same variants on the ongoing series. So this is an authority record for an individual conference, and it should have the qualifiers for that individual conference, in my opinion, at least. And then there is this question, I saw the words al-Duwali. If this is an international conference, you can see from the last 670 that some publications do have a name in English that includes the word international. And so there is a possibility that the preferred name should be English because as we looked at preferred names for international bodies, if English is one of the names, we would choose that. And then in this example, we have a bunch of problems. So the conference name in the 111, the preferred name, the cataloger retained Altani, which means second, and we're supposed to drop number out of the preferred name. Again, we have an Arabic script variant access point in the 411 that's not justified, which would be acceptable in an older AACR2 record, but this is an RDA record, and it should have the Arabic in the 670. The location of the conference is not justified anywhere. Where did Cairo come from? Can't just throw it into an access point. It has to be justified. And the name is probably also incorrectly formulated. So Mutamar al-Doli al-Tani li-Kizm al-Falsafa includes the full name of its parent, which is the Department of Philosophy. And remember, we saw a slide that said when you're considering whether it falls under type 6 for the full name of the parent, you only have to consider whether it includes the full name of the immediate parent, which in this case it does. So I think this actually fits the subordinate type 6, and I believe that the correct form for this conference heading is likely to be what I show in the bottom half of the screen. So entered under the University of Cairo Department of Philosophy, Mutamar al-Dali or is it National Conference? And then the 411s that I showed with the variants in direct order. But again, al-Tani should definitely be dropped off of whatever the end result is, and any variants. And here's another common error that I want to caution people about. This heading has no problems at all. This is perfectly good. It's the Mutamar al-Ilmi al-Duali al-Rabi al-Muhakam at this university faculty. Now, the name for the conference in English would be International Scientific Conference. And that would be considered to be very generic, kind of like international conference or annual conference. The word, I think in this case, just because that's scientific, and it does not make it a very specific phrase. So it's correct to enter this subordinately to the faculty, the Kulliyat al-Amal of the university. But when you browse in OCLC for authorities under Jamiat Jarash, you'll see this authority record for the conference. But remember what I said, that all elements in a hierarchy that are higher must also be established. The Kulliyat al-Amal is not established. So this is a serious error that the cataloger should have established the Kulliyat al-Amal and then the heading for the individual conference. Okay. So here's a case where we again have a conference. In this case, the information recorded does not justify entering this subordinately. So the name Mutamar al-Dirasat wa al-Lugat al-Ajnabiyya is distinctive. It means Conference on Foreign Studies and Languages, which is not just like conference or scientific conference or annual conference. This should have been entered. This does not fit into any of the types. So it doesn't include the full name of the parent body. It just has the name of the conference. So this should be entered directly under its own name as a 111. The Arabic script name also should be recorded in the 670 to justify any 410s or 411s. For individual conferences, of course, numbering, date, and location should also be included in the 4XX fields. There's no justification in the 670 that this was held in Amman. Now, you may be assuming Amman because it's organized by the Faculty of Arts at the University of Jordan. But who's to say it wasn't held in a different city, even if that faculty organized it? So it needs to have justification. The date as well, 2005, is not justified anywhere. That needs to be in the 670. And then just a minor punctuation error that you can see in the 410 that they put a period at the end, and we don't end variant access point fields with a period unless that last word is an initial or abbreviation. So I think this record needs a complete overhaul. Okay, we could spend 2 more hours looking at bad examples. It's always easy to find them. I looked for some that I thought contained important things to remind people about. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about access points for corporate body. You'll start with the preferred name. So that's the first important thing, is determine the preferred name. And then you make additions, which are, of course, qualifiers, following the order listed in 1113 1.2 to 1.8 in that order as applicable. And those rules cover type of body, associated place, associated institution, associated date, type of jurisdiction, other designation, and then lastly, number, date, and location of a conference. In general, the designations for type of body, type of jurisdiction, and most other designations should be in English. And one big caution is that if you're using an associated institution as a qualifier, we only use the preferred name, not the authorized access point for that associated institution. And we'll have another slide to illustrate this, because it's a very common error that people put the full AAP of an associated institution in a qualifier. Qualifiers are given in a single set of parentheses separated by space, colon, space. You all know that. The only qualifiers that are given in separate subfields are the ones for conference number, date, and location. And then there are times where a qualifier is a core element. One of those cases is a corporate body whose name does not convey the idea of a corporate body. In that case, we will either add type of corporate body or other designation associated with the body. And this applies to conferences as well, if the conference has a name, but it does not convey the idea of a conference. So the examples here, we have Adalat Barayi Iran, which means justice for Iran. That name does not convey the idea of a corporate body, so the cataloger added in parentheses an English word, organization. In the example to the right of that, we have an acronym, and most acronyms are not considered to be conveying the idea of a corporate body. And in this case, the cataloger has chosen to use other designation. And for the other designation, they've chosen the full spelled out form of the name that that acronym represents. Now, this one happens to be in Spanish. Couldn't find one in Arabic or Persian. But this somewhat violates the idea that the other designation should be in English. So this is an exception where if you're using the spelled out form of the acronym, it might not be in English. And then the last example is an example of a conference. The conference in English would be Islamic Endowment and Sustainable Development. That sounds like a subject or a title, doesn't sound like a corporate body. So in this case, the name requires a qualifier to explain that this is a conference name. The other time that qualifiers become core is when you have a corporate body whose name conflicts with another corporate body. And you are adding to that one or more appropriate qualifiers to differentiate. Excuse me. Now, again, a reminder, if you're using an associated institution as a qualifier, only the preferred name is included. And this is different from what we do when we're using this qualifier in a work or series access point, where we use the full authorized access point. So here are just some examples. Here we have the authorized access point for this markaz. If we need to use this markaz as a qualifier for another corporate body, we are not going to include Cairo, Egypt. But if it's a series authority and we're using it as a qualifier, we do include both the name as well as the parentheses, Cairo, Egypt. So we end up with two sets of parentheses. Another example we have, this is an Iranian art museum, but Ab Anbar does not convey the idea of a corporate body. So it has art museum added as a qualifier. But if we had something that needed Ab Anbar in a qualifier, we would not include the English qualifier art museum. And then another example is a university where a date was used as a qualifier. So if we needed to use this university as the location of a conference or as a qualifier for some other center or other kind of corporate body, we don't include the date in that qualifier. But for a work series authority record, we would include the full access point. And then last, core qualifier is for conferences. If you have numbers, dates, and locations of a conference for an individual conference, if those are applicable and readily determined, those become core. So we have to include them in the access point. You can also use an associated institution instead of the location if the institution's name provides better identification than the place name or names, or if the place name or names are not known or cannot be readily determined. But a local place is usually preferred over an institution as a location of conference. And again, if you're using that associated institution, you're going to give the preferred name, not the authorized access point. If you have multiple locations in a conference, you include them. You can include them. There is also an option in RDA to leave them out, which I'm not covering here. But if you do include the multiple places, you separate them by semicolons, and they each get their own separate subfield C. And one last thing about corporate bodies, about variant access points. A variant access point can start with either the preferred name or a variant name. And then you will make additions or qualifiers from 11.13 1.2 to 1.8 in that order as applicable. Again, qualifiers are given in a single set of parentheses like for authorized access points, except for with conference qualifiers for number, date, and location, we get separate subfields. Now, if you're starting a variant access point with the preferred name, you'll have to use different qualifiers from those that have been used in the 1XX field. The 4XX can conflict with the 4XX in other NARs, but you also can choose to differentiate them with qualifiers. So in my two examples here, I illustrate all of that. So we have the Danishgah Imam Sadiq, and you can see that in this case, it has the acronym ISU. ISU is an acronym for many other corporate bodies, and so it could just be ISU, but the cataloger has chosen to add the qualifier, a spelled out form of the name, as an other distinguishing attribute in the 410. And then in the second example, we have the Malaria Eradication Training Center, and we've got a variant starting with that same name, but with a different qualifier that has been chosen. Okay, I've only got a few slides for families, and I know we're getting toward the end, so we may not have a lot of time for questions, but I told Iman I will answer questions offline and we can publish them. So I want to just very briefly talk about families. That's covered in chapter 10. Again, we have to choose a preferred name for family, and that will be the name by which the family is most commonly known. And families includes families as well as larger groups like clans, dynasties, and royal houses. We'll start with the preferred name for an access point, and then we will add in parentheses the type of family, and that is core element. It must always be added. It is not separately subfielded, so it's included in subfield A. Then we add a space, colon, space, and in the same set of parentheses, if we have a date associated with the family, we add that in subfield D, and date is a core element. So if the date can be ascertained, it must be included in the authorized access point. And then optionally, if you still have a conflict, if you need to distinguish one family from another, we can add in the same set of parentheses, one or both of the following: a place associated with the family, which gets put in subfield C, or a prominent member of the family, which goes in subfield G. And optionally, place and or prominent member can be included even if not needed to differentiate one family from another. So let's look at a title that we have here, a bunch of title for the House of Saud. And you can see the name appears in English as Saud or Al Saud, in Arabic as Al Saud, I think, in a variety of forms, both hyphenated, no, not hyphenated in the Arabic, apparently. So we've got a couple of different forms of the name that we discovered through research. If we're looking at reference sources, you can see in Wikipedia, it's entered as House of Saud. In Britannica, it's called the Saud Dynasty. I've also given in the bottom the Arabic Wikipedia article again, which says that it's the house of Saud. So how do we just figure out the preferred name? So that is, you have to go through the instructions in RDA for preferred name, but basically RDA sends you to the rules for personal names and says to apply those same names, same rules for personal names for family names. And for languages written in non-Latin script, there's a policy statement that says to apply the alternative to use a well-established form in English as the preferred name if the cataloger's judgment and experience suggest that the person is likely to be found in general English language reference sources. So we know that this family, Saud, is definitely found in general English language reference sources. We saw it in Wikipedia, we saw it in Britannica. So probably we would choose Saud as the preferred name. But your judgment might be different. You might end up with Al Saud, or you might, in certain cases, you might end up with a transliterated form of Arabic or Persian. So we start with the preferred name, then we have to add a type of family. And there are two choices here. We have royal house and or dynasty. Either one might be correct. There are dates associated with this particular family. This particular royal house started in 1720. So we have a date, 1720-. We also know that there is a place associated with the family, Saudi Arabia. And we could identify a number of prominent members of the family, several of whom have been established in the authority file, and there might be others. So I've given you some possible answers if you were setting this name up in the authority file. If you decided the preferred name is Saud, which I think is most likely, then you would add the type of family and the date, and you could be done. You might decide if it was Al Saud that you include the Al in there, if English language predominantly justifies that, English language sources. Or you could use dynasty instead of royal house. Or you could add the place, associated place, to the access point, even though there's no conflict. You could judge that you want to put the place in there, or you could put a prominent member of the family. So there's a lot of options, and it's a judgment call. For variant access points for family, you start with a preferred name or a variant name. And if you're starting with a preferred name, you add a different other core or optional elements to differentiate it from the authorized access point. And if you're starting with a variant name, you generally add the same elements that were added to the authorized access point. And additional variant access points can be made using different other core or optional elements. So here's just some examples of that. Here in the first example, it's hard to find Arabic and Persian because not a lot of these names have been set up. So I'm using English names here. So in the first case, we have different spellings of this family's name, but otherwise everything is the same. In the second example, the cataloger has chosen to add a place, even though probably the dates are sufficient to differentiate this Calder family from another Calder family. In the third example, you can see that their cataloger has chosen to include West Virginia as the qualifier, but they've made variant access points from other options that could have been chosen. So in the first two 400s, we have prominent members of the family used in the access point. In the third 400, we have a different place, as well in the fourth 400, we have a different place. These are all the same family. And then in the last example, again, we have the same family. They've chosen one prominent member of the family in the authorized access point, but made a variant access point from a different prominent member of the family. There are a few things with non-Latin script. So here's an example of a Japanese clan. So where we have a non-Latin script reference. In the second example, we have chosen royal house as the qualifier, but they've chosen made a variant from the same name using dynasty. And then we do have a couple of variant names for the Windsor family. We have an Arabic script name, Windsor, with the same qualifiers. And then the Pahlavi dynasty, where we have two different forms. I think, yeah, one of these is Persian, one of these is Arabic. Okay, so two last slides. Subjects and families. It used to be that we had instructions from Library of Congress that you couldn't use an RDA family name as a subject. But LC finally decided that restriction was no longer needed. So for all new family names, we code these as subject equals A and subject use equals A. And if it's an existing authority record that you're changing, we would revise it to change the coding to in the 008 to A and A from, it used to be N and B, and to delete the 667 note that had this text. Subject usage disvalid, heading is not valid for use as a subject. So we won't include a 667 in new family names, but we will delete them from existing ones and change the fixed field coding. So you can see in this example for the Bush family of Connecticut that the subject coding is A, and there's no 667 note. So this has been updated because it was originally created in 2014. So here's the LCSH policy. According to the subject headings manual, you must assign an LCSH heading for the name of a family. If that name is not in LCSH, that means you need to propose it through SACO. Optionally, if there is a name authority record for the particular family that is the subject of this book, you can also assign it from the authority record in the name authority file. The key thing is that LCSH headings don't represent specific individual families. So they don't include any qualifiers. They don't differentiate one family from another that uses a different spelling. So for example, there's a subject authority record for the Smith family. It has a variant access point for Smith with a Y and an E at the end. But there might be a name authority record for Smith with the Y and an E, a specific family from Rhode Island. And if your book is actually about that family, you would assign Smith family from LCSH, which is required by the subject headings manual. And optionally, you could assign the name authority record for the family. So if the name is not in LCSH, and since it's a required access point from LCSH, you must do a SACO proposal. Okay, I think I've run out of time, and I don't know how many people